In this episode, Anurag Basnet speaks about his experience as an editor, his love for translations, and his much lauded work, Fruits of the Barren Tree, which is translated from the award winning Nepali novel Phoolange, written by author Lekhnath Chetri. Fruits of the Barren Tree depicts the plight of an ordinary man caught in the Gorkhaland movement of the late 1980s, which focused on creating a separate state out of the Darjeeling region in West Bengal, India. It is a story of a failed campaign and a cautionary tale of how easily the contagion of violence can infect a community. Anurag Basnet is an editor and translator based in Noida, Delhi. He has been associated with the publishing industry for over 17 years, with stints at Penguin Random House India, Rupa Publications, and Speaking Tiger. His published works include translations of travelogue by Anil Yadav, titled as Is That Even a Country, Sir? And a book of essays by Ravish Kumar, The Free Voice on Democracy, Culture and the Nation. The book Fruits of the Barren Tree can be purchased using the link given in the show notes. Welcome to our podcast, Harshni and Anurag.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You have been in the publishing industry for a very long time. What made you take up a career in publishing?
Well, from the beginning, I've been interested in reading, and it seemed like a natural progression from what I was studying in college, which was English literature, to a career in books. Also, it suits my temperament, which tends towards, I would say, slightly solitary professions, because to an extent, books editorially or the editorial function is a solitary exercise. When you're working on a book, it is just you. Of course, it also entails liaising with different people, different teams, but primarily the job is focused. You do it almost entirely on your own. So that drew me to it, and it's just a it's when your passion becomes your job kind of a thing.
Can you tell us a bit about your experience in book publishing?
I joined publishing in 2006. I joined Penguin Books India. At that time, it was Penguin Books India. I joined as what is called an editorial assistant. Editorial assistant is more or less an intern, I would say. The first thing that we were taught was deal with text, essentially. To deal with text, deal with masses of text, because books are different from, let's say, the copy desk in a newspaper. Because uh, in a when you're looking at a newspaper article, it's around 1,500 words, lesser sometimes, but not much more than 2,000 words, I would say. Whereas even a novella is around 20-25,000 words. So what we were taught primarily was to maintain focus over this long period of time also, and uh, and to look at text at different levels. So structurally, from the point of view of the wide angle focus, I would say, structurally, do things make sense? If it's fiction, is there consistency? Is there consistency in characters? Is there consistency in what's happening? Is there something missing in the plot? Is something extraneous to the plot? Can something be removed? And one of the things that I think we were taught quite well, I think, and with a great deal of insistence, is that less is more, especially when telling stories. Less is more. I mean, try and pare it down as much as you can. Um, the second focus was, of course, looking at then at grammar, paragraphs, and then finally at the level of the sentence. So we were trained from structure to proofing to how to, how to come up with book covers, for instance, right? From the beginning, that was one of the things that was taught. That um, how do you package something just right for the market? Mm, how do you give suitable suitable instructions or suitable guidelines to a cover designer in terms of your book. So that kind of thing. And as one grew senior in the role, uh, we were taught, or I started learning to look at the market itself, trends, what works, what doesn't, that kind of thing. So it has been a very fulfilling experience across all um, roles in publishing, except for the sales function. I think I've looked at kind of everything. Um, that is one. And one of the things I think that is intensely, that never grows old, so to speak, is when you come across this fantastic book, which you think is fantastic, it comes to you, or you come across an idea which you think is, this is just perfect for the times, and the editorial rule is just that it is to be excited about something and then to convey that excitement first internally to the team and then externally to the market. So the whole process of marketing and packaging and editing, working closely with the author or editor, and then shaping the book. And and when that book goes out into the market, if it sells well, if it does well, if it reaches a number of people like it, it's a very fulfilling experience. It makes you feel really good. If something does well and commercially, that's excellent. If something does well critically, that's also brilliant. Somebody comes back to you and says, I really like that book. I thought it was wonderfully written, or that book spoke to me. So that is one of the things that I still, after many years, I'm still thrilled when that happens.
Please tell us about the non-fiction books that you have translated.
From editing into translation was, at first I didn't know I could translate. I wasn't, so when one is working, you tend to focus on your core areas, in the thing that you are trained for, and you do that. But I started translating with this travelogue called "Is That Even a Country," which is a English translation of travelogue called "वो भी कोई देश है महाराज" by Anil Yadav. The first thing that draws you to a translation is, unless you're being paid millions of rupees, uh, is that you have to like the book. Something in a book appeals to you, clicks. Uh, I personally think that translation is the ultimate book recommendation. It's like somebody saying that, I like this enough for me to actually bring it to you in a language that I understand and you understand. Let's just share it and make it more kind of widely known. And that was what Wobikwe Desi Maharaj was doing. So the premise is very unique. It's a very unique proposition. So um, I think this was happening during the late 2000s or no, early 2000s or so, when there was a lot of violence in the Northeast, and people were being persecuted and you know uh, in, sent away essentially. So especially people from the mainland were being sent away, and there was a lot of anger and violence because of various reasons. So while this is happening, a newspaper reporter who's living in Delhi decides that I should go there and see what's happening. What's interesting is that this is the kind of journalism that is appealing in that sense, right? It's not helicopter journalism where somebody flies in and speaks to maybe three or four or five key people or non-key people or whatever, draws some conclusions, uh, and makes extrapolations and comes back and writes about it. So this reporter who goes there, Anil Yadav, is has no money, has no connections, um, and he's going there almost like a blank slate. Let me see what's happening, and I'll write about it. Uh, and his experiences on the ground are as interesting and as insightful as the political conclusions he draws from what's happening. And in many senses, it's this kind of where somebody is not magisterially explaining what's happening in the Northeast. So we get a lot of that kind of writing also, where here, come, let me explain what's happening. So, so the author essentially is saying that let me try and figure out what's going on, and if I can figure it out, you know, I'll try and explain it to you as well. And if you don't figure it out, then we don't. So that attitude, and there's very real danger because he. The interesting thing is he's in a minority there, so 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 that made for a lot of tension, that made for very good reading, and it was quite well received also in Hindi as well, and I think in English also. Quite a few people read it and liked that kind of almost like this gonzo kind of approach to to journalism. So that worked nicely. So that was the first book basically I translated, and since then, after that I translated Ravish Kumar's essays from Hindi into English.
Yes.
That that of course was a project had to be done. His his ideas and the things he says about contemporary India and contemporary society are just too powerful to ignore, and uh, especially what he says about media, what he says about culture, what he says about what's happening on a daily basis is too compelling to ignore, and more than that, passion in that sense that he brings to this subject, the kind of almost personal anguish that he brings to these topics makes a very compelling reading. And the idea was that if more people read it, then it perhaps it's better for us, that kind of a thing. I stopped translating from Hindi after that, 2018. Yeah, 19 was when that book came out. 18 was it? Yeah, 18 is when it came out, Ravish Kumar's. Then I moved to Gangtok, and there again I found that a lot of compelling writing is happening in contemporary Nepali literature. So that's where the focus has been.
How do you think your experience as an editor helped you in your translation work?
Being an editor makes life a little difficult also, uh, if you are a translator. But I think these two roles meld into each other. At least in my case, it does, because when I translate, so the first thing I do is read through the book, and then I lay down a first draft. And mostly the first draft is pretty crappy, I would say. When you go back and read it again, it's pretty much raw. Uh, Once that first draft is done, then my translator's cap in that sense is off. Then I have to put on my editorial hat and editor's hat and start working on the text. One of the things that is true of translations is that the book in English has to work in English. It has to stand up as it has to stand as an independent work all its own. It has to have its own internal logic. It has to have the dialogues, for instance, have to ring true. If there are contextual references that are not understood to, or that are that let's say a Nepali reader understands, perhaps the English reader may not understand. So all of those factors, all of those things have to be fixed as an editor, not as a translator. So being an editor really is sometimes key to getting the text to a slightly more mature level than it started out. Right? Um, and that helps because it shortens the process, I think. So if I just submitted something which has not been edited or has not been worked on, uh, then somebody else will have to work on it, obviously.
Right.
And there is a problem there because I'm translating from Nepali, for instance. Most publishing houses or would not have that expertise to I would prefer that the editor also knew Nepali if they were editing my book. So without so it helps if I work on it, because at least I'm sure that I won't say that 100% of everything has been sorted, because it's not possible. I'm too close to the text, but I'm reasonably sure about 95 to 96% of everything that has to be fixed has been fixed. So being an editor and a translator, really meld into each other. I think all translators in that sense are also editors. If you've had training, even better.
You have done a translation of both non-fiction and now fiction with Fruits of the Barren Tree. How different is the translating the non-fiction from fiction?
The first draft is not different at all. The laying down of the first draft is not different. The process is absolutely the same for fiction and non-fiction. You're just sitting there and getting text on paper or on screen as is. Once that is done, and when you start reviewing the work, that's where the differences start coming in. Fiction, especially novels, also short stories, or also novellas, uh, they are fiction is a universe of its own. The author is trying to create a universe which is entirely self-contained, and it has its own internal logic, it has its own internal pace, it has its own internal movement, and it moves in a certain way, which is inexorable. Uh, you can't fiddle with it in that sense. You can't change it. You can't change the course of it. It's done. Uh, as a translator, what you're trying to do is to get that universe in its entirety and trying to transplant it to a different language, another language. Messy process. And but the problem that I find is that fiction tends to be a little less malleable than nonfiction. It's not as easily reshaped. I'll give you examples. So this book that I'm translating right now, or I just submitted it uh, to my editor at Penguin. So just before coming here for this, the book is called House of Modern Bone in English. In Nepali, it's called Mata Ko Ghar, which means House of Mud. So the author Sanjay Bishta has written it with no sense of uh, with no sense that it's going to be translated or it has to be translated. He's written it entirely as per his own lights, and he's written it for a very specific Nepali audience. He understands, his reader understands. It's between him and them. It's between him and me also. As a reader, I understand the specific cultural contexts. I understand the asides. I understand the things that are not said, because in a novel, it's fiction is as much about what is said as what is unsaid. And I think our pleasure in reading fiction also comes from filling in those gaps, right? Whether it is politics or culture or emotion or relationships, the the beauty of reading fiction sometimes, or the joy of reading fiction, also comes from the fact that we uh, tend to complete the author's sentences. As a translator, it puts me in a spot because I can't. Some of it is just unexplainable, and building context and that which is unsaid. So I had to kind of strike a very fine balance between explicating what is leaving unsaid to make a judgment on you know what can I leave behind which is unsaid. Will the reader in English understand? And one can explain certain things via footnotes, but fiction mostly doesn't work with footnotes. It's just too much of an intervention. Whereas in nonfiction, life is much easier because I can explicate things. I can intervene to a certain extent. I can even use footnotes as a strategy uh, to provide a whole layer of meaning, a new layer of meaning, right? So that way they're very different in terms of translation, uh, mainly because one has to judge what to explain, what not to explain. Both give tremendous joy, but the process of working the text becomes or is very different for fiction and non-fiction, at least for me.
Can you talk about the contemporary fiction in Nepali language?
Writing in Nepali is divided geographically into two parts, or at least so geographically into two parts. There is writing in Nepali in Nepal, centered on the realities of Nepal, the political realities, the economic realities of Nepal. And one of the things about one of the things I really admire about Nepal is this robust connection with books. They There is a very strong, dedicated reading culture. There is this hunger. I think there is this hunger also, uh, at least from the at least since the Civil War. I think there is this sense of a country trying to understand itself. There is amongst the young people, amongst the older generation, there is this hunger to narrativize and to understand and to see where they're going, see what has happened, see where they're going. Historically, there's been a very robust tradition of writing, fiction, fiction also non-fiction, poetry, drama, uh, poetry especially. There have been some great poets in Nepal, short stories. But I think, at least in the contemporary scene, uh, post I would say post the transition to from monarchy into the republic, which was a very messy period. That's thrown up some of the best writing from Nepal, I would say. Uh, Authors like Manjushri Thapa and writing in English, Samrat Upadhyay, Prashant Jha, political commentators, uh, and this. So these are people writing in English, and in Nepali there is this whole there are a bunch of writers writing in Nepali also. So there is a robust reading culture, as I said, and there is a robust reviewing culture. For instance, there is an author called Buddhisagar, okay, who's by far by far a bestseller in Nepal. So that's happening there across the border, at least in Kathmandu. On this side of the border, in India, we also have a tradition of writing in Nepali. However, that writing is, you know, all about here. It's not about Nepal, or it's not. It doesn't look there for. It doesn't look across the border for inspiration. So we have our own. We have our own issues. We have our own. We have the things that we have to write about. The Nepali-speaking population in India is actually scattered. It's informed by migration. So we've had migration from Nepal into India since the late 1800s or so, and successive waves of migration have resulted in people coming in and settling in various parts of India. Right. So there is a Nepali population in Darjeeling, Kalimpong, that area. So that population lives uh, as agriculturalists in uh, you know as agriculturalists. Some people work on tea estates. So that's one population. Another population of Nepalis live in the northeast. So Assam, Nagaland, Manipur. So there's a strong population of Nepalis there. And there is a population of Nepalis in Dehradun. So these are three of the key areas, I think, where Nepalis live. And of course, there is a floating Nepali population, Nepali speaking population all over India. Um, Migrants from Darjeeling, and by Nepali speaking, I mean Nepali speaking Indian citizens. Writing has come from all three areas. So Darjeeling has a robust writing culture from the beginning. In Assam, we have writers in Dehradun, but uh, the issues or the topics, the themes that they write on are local for them. Okay, so for instance, I'll give you the example of a writer called Lil Bahadur Chetri. So Lil Bahadur Chetri is is one of our most kind of prominent writers. He lives in Assam, in Guwahati. Um, his concerns or his themes are essentially of Nepalese writing or living in Assam. Uh, Whereas somebody like a Nepali writer like Chudan Kabimo who lives in Kalimpong, his book Patsong, which was translated as Song of the Soil by Ajit Baral, was shortlisted for the JCB last year. Uh, and he talks about the Andolan, which is very specific to him. So that way, contemporary Nepali writing is, in a sense, fragmented geographically, spatially, in terms of what people write about. So uh, some of the contemporary writers in Kalimpong or in Darjeeling are Chudin Kabimo and Lekhnath Chetri, Sanjay Bishta, Babita Maden, all of these people who are writing about contemporary issues for Darjeeling, which is Gorkhaland and violence and identity to an extent. Whereas somebody like Lil Bahadur Chetri writing from Assam is one of his most famous books is called Brahmaputra Bachevsa. So it's about life near the Brahmaputra. So it's fragmented. The contemporary writing scene, at least in Nepal, in India, is fragmented. Uh, People are writing about various things, and I think it makes for very interesting literature. It makes for very interesting reading because it's not monolithic. It's not, it's not right people writing about the same issues or the same topics. There are lots of things to focus on.
Backdrop for this novel, Fruits of the Barren Tree, is Gorkhaland movement for a separate state. Please give us some historical and political context about the movement, and also tell us why did you choose to translate this particular book.
So the it starts actually with the story of porous borders. So the borders between Nepal and India have always been porous, right? Uh, and especially after the mid 1800s, uh, when the Treaty of Sugauli was signed, a lot of things happened around that time. One was the decision on the part of the British Empire to make or to build Darjeeling as a sanatorium for their people. So Darjeeling was part of the Sikkim kingdom, and then it went over to the British, and they decided, okay, this is a suitable place for us to build a sanatorium for our soldiers, some sort of place where they can recover, and also their discovery that the slopes of Darjeeling specifically, and Kersham, not Kalimpong, are suitable to grow tea. So actually, that's where the story begins, to be honest. Now, when you're setting up a town, when you're setting up a city, in a sense, on top of a hill. So when you go to Darjeeling, you will see or you will realize one thing, which is that it's a very labor intensive town. Everything that has been built there has been built by dint of a lot of sheer hard labor, you know. Uh, and it's quite obvious even now. The train, for instance, the Darjeeling, the famous Darjeeling toy train. Everyone, we talk about it as a marvel of engineering. We talk about it as a marvel. It is a marvel of engineering. Yes, it is a marvel of engineering and civil engineering uh, and ingenuity. But it's also a marvel of labor. Laying tracks on that incline with no modern machinery. With there are these old photographs of women, women actually pulling kind of makeshift bulldozers to just, and if you look at the terrain and destroying thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of forest to build or to plant tea required labor. So that's where the story begins, right? So where do you get labor from? Because people from the plains are not suited uh, to go to the hills and work there. So they couldn't easily transport labor from the plains to work there. So uh, the British encouraged migration into Darjeeling and surrounding areas. So the pay was better than Nepal, obviously. Uh, you know, you, you could come and go as you please. So while Darjeeling was part of the British Empire, things were fine, right? But after independence, what happened was Darjeeling, that entire area was or became part of West Bengal, right? So it wasn't. From the beginning, it was a district in West Bengal. It is a topographically distinct region as far as West Bengal is concerned. It is a linguistically distinct region. It is a culturally distinct region. And from the beginning, uh, there was a fear as a minority living in a large state, perhaps the benefits of being, perhaps the benefits would not reach us. I think that was a consistent fear, and also the natural fear of being a minority was quite palpable from the beginning. So if you look at the history of the Gorkhaland, this kind of struggle for identity from the beginning, right from the time of independence, various letters, various applications, various appeals had been made um, for the for the formation of a separate state, which would safeguard the rights of the Nepali-speaking Indian citizens, right? Uh, of course, there was a degree of confusion on what that union might be, what that state might be. Who would it who would it be for? Even today, even today there is a confusion. I mean, I can see this quite freely that if you're talking about a separate state of Gorkhaland for Nepali-speaking people of India, would that include Nepali-speaking people in Assam, for instance? Would that include Nepali-speaking people in Dehradun or in Delhi or in Nepali-speaking Indian? So there is a degree of confusion. But from the beginning, there was this sense that we need a space that is our own. We need a space that is away from the influence or away from the uh, administrative influence of West Bengal. This was a simmering issue, along with other issues, as is quite natural of states in India, other issues of development, other issues of infrastructure. This was also a simmering issue. But things came to a head in the 1980s when this leader called Subhash Kising came to power in Darjeeling, and he set up an outfit called the GNLF, Gorkha National Liberation Front, and he emerged as the single voice for the demand of a separate state. Okay, uh, so as soon as GNLF was formed, uh, uh, an outfit, an allied outfit called the Gorkha Volunteer Cell (GVC) was also formed, and in 1986, this movement became violent, right? So imagine this, like so GNLF is a new party in Darjeeling. The administrators or the people in power, the party in power is the CPIM, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and obviously they came into conflict immediately. Uh, so it began with that. So once unrest started happening, then the state had to intervene. So so when the state intervened, then it became a three-way fight almost. So internally, the new party and the CPIM are already in conflict, and then the party in power comes, or the state government has to intervene. So this continued for about 2 years, 1986 to 1988. We had 2 years of violence in which official records say 1,200 people died, many more people died, many more people disappeared. Then in 2007, the a separate another party came up which said that no, the demand was always for Gorkhaland. We should not be satisfied with this kind of stopgap arrangement. A new revolution, a new Andolan started. So this happened under the leadership of uh, a person called Bimal Guru, and the party was called GGM, Gorkha Janmukti Morcha. This movement started in 2007, ended in 2017. The same problem that had happened earlier happened now, which was a single party system. Single
Right.
party uh, dominated politics, dominated the discourse. One of the things that happens when discourse is dominated by a very powerful group of individuals is that writing suffers. 2017, finally, the party kind of was dismantled. A kind of a multi-party system almost came into came into power, and that changed a lot of things. That changed a lot of things, um, in the sense that suddenly there was this atmosphere where one could write and speak about these things. The parties that went before, the GNLF and the GGMs, they must have had their own reasons for not allowing people to speak or people to write. But the side effect of that ban was that we had no chance to process the violence that happened. We had no chance to process the trauma, the fear, all of that. We had no chance to record our stories. And there were many stories, individual stories, collective stories, uh, to the extent that we had no chance to even document the Andolan itself in the form of fiction or non-fiction. So now we were in 2017, we were at this stage where any researcher wanting to find out more about what happened in 88 and has no access to material. There is no documentation, right? 2019 was the first time a novel was published, which was Fatsum. I got a hold of that novel and I read it, and I was like, wow, this is finally happening. This is finally happening. Like somebody, we're finally writing about these things after 30, 35 years. Finally, we're writing about these things. So then I started looking around, who else is writing, what other books are being written. So at which point I found, I was also told or directed towards Phoolange. This book has also been written. Please read it. And as soon as I did, the first thing I knew was that it has to be translated. Obviously, why? Because this is a story that has not been written about for such a long time. One, but it's also such a wonderfully written story. It's got force. It's got a lot of power, a lot of raw anger also. The first thing that struck me was, more people should read it. Why not? So that's where it started. It's a long, long-winded answer to a very short question.
No, no, no. That's fine. That's fine. When we actually get into the novel, the protagonist Basnet and his family, and even the villagers, most of the villagers, they don't seem to be having any idea about what the moment is all about, why they are fighting.
That is true for most. That is true for most movements. I think everywhere, large or small. That is true for politics in general. To be honest, um, decisions are taken elsewhere mostly, uh, and those decisions are made to made with whatever considerations there are, the real politic considerations at that of that particular moment. Um, but those decisions affect individual lives, and I think that's what this novel is all about. The idea that a gale, a storm can blow elsewhere, but one stray one stray kind of breeze coming from that can throw everything in turmoil or can throw everything in uproar in another place. So in this particular case, if you look at it topographically, uh, Bijanbari is so imagine a hill, right? And on the horizon from that hill, so imagine a hill, on top of that is Darjeeling. You can stand here and look across the valley to the hill on the horizon, and that's Bijanbari, actually, in reality. As the crow flies, it'll hardly be, I would say, around 25-30 kilometers, right? But it is another world. It could be another world. And we're talking about 1980s, right? 1980s when, forget mobile phones and the internet, we didn't have television. Television was a very late addition to our lives in the hills. Uh, and even when we did have television, finally in the early 90s, I think, uh, you know, um, we didn't have a broadcasting station nearby. So the nearest broadcasting station was actually in Bangladesh. We could actually, we actually spent a year in the 90s when the television first came into the area watching programs from Bangladesh instead of India. The point is that decisions that are being taken place with real politic implications in Darjeeling will reach Bijanbari magnified. The reasons why some decisions are being taken, and also local politics will interpret orders and decisions in its own way as it suits their convenience, right? So 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 at the end of the day, what happened was that uh, large political movements, which is happening elsewhere, affected village politics in a very real sense, because then it gave people excuses to carry out their personal vendettas, as is there in the book. You know, it gave people an excuse to act on their personal prejudices, right? Um, and so that's why I think that's why in the book you get the sense that things happening elsewhere affect people individually here, but they really don't know, because there is no one to explain. There is no one to explain why something is happening, or what is the larger context of why something is happening. They're just told that this is a flag, you have to wave it, and they'll wave it because if you don't wave it, uh, something bad will happen to you. So that's, I think that's the idea of why Lekhnath chose to write it the way he did. Yeah.
Can you tell us the meaning of Phoolange, the Nepali title of fruits of the barren tree?
So Phoolange is a rustic Nepali term which is used in an agrarian context. Uh, so certain seeds which you plant become trees. They bear flowers which don't convert into fruit. So, like for instance, mangoes don't grow in the hills. But if you plant a mango sapling, it will grow up and become a tree. It'll bear flowers, but it won't bear fruit. The word Phulange stands as a metaphor for everything. It is a metaphor for the idea of Darjeeling itself, which is that the idea took root very strongly. There was a lot of there was a lot of popular support for the idea. It took robust shape. It became a tree, but nothing came of it. So just as the principal character is, has potential, uh, could have become something, but didn't. So the same, I think, so the same fate has befallen successively over two andolans. Uh, that's the same Phoolange fate has befallen us. So it stands as a metaphor.
Looking back at the Gorkhaland moment and the fallout, what are your reflections as a student of literature?
So the history of the Gorkhaland movement for me is a history of violence. It has reached very close, or it has reached people's lives very closely. It has affected people's lives very closely. Um, I lost an uncle in the Andolan, where he was an elderly gentleman, 50s in his 50s. He was blind, uh, or technically, I would say he had glaucoma, so he couldn't see at all almost. And there was a time when he was when we were having when we were experiencing these successive raids in the village. So where the paramilitary forces would come, and there'd be a shakedown and interrogation and all of that. And my uncle, he was actually a government employee, and one day he panicked and he ran. A raid was happening, and he ran, and he hid in his fields, and patrolling a party of paramilitary forces which was patrolling encountered him and shot him dead. So so it's a history of violence, and this is not one single story. This is not just my story. This is a story almost everyone will tell you. You go and ask anyone, they will have a story of this kind. If it's not this outright murder, it'll be of people coming and just interrogating people, uh, terrorizing people. So the biggest fallout, or the biggest thing that we can learn from these past 30-35 years, I think, is that the most important act is to document violence, and that's what we did not do. The most important act is to document violence, because when you document violence, when you document state violence, when you document uh, interpersonal violence, when you document all of this, violence against women, right? Uh, if you don't document it as it is happening, or at least as soon as it has happened, um, then it becomes very easy to deny this violence. It's almost as if it never happened. So people from today's generation, if we talk about these things, for them a lot of young people that I speak to say that this sounds like stories, these sounds like legends. So that is the one thing uh, that I think we can learn from these last 35 years, is at least now let's start collecting these stories. At least now let's start talking about these things. Let's start talking about these things. Let's start talking about what happened. Let's start talking about, in non-fiction, what happened. Let's start. If it's too difficult to document these things, let's start talking uh, in our stories. Let's make fiction out of it. And so this is one thing that I've been, I keep mentioning, and in the hope that somebody will take it up and we can all collectively take it up. Uh, Something that I think is very urgent to do, which is to collect the oral histories of people, because oral histories are very important. You know, things that happened in 1986, people are going to forget. Those who lived through those times will there will come a time when they'll go away, they'll pass on, and then what do we do? You know? I'll tell you this very interesting thing that happened recently. So I was writing about my uncle, for a article in a paper, not in a paper, it was an online thing. And so I wrote it down as I remembered. Okay. Then I asked, no, so it happened. So in my memory, it happened in a certain way. The raid happened from a certain direction, um, and that was the sequence of events. Then I went and asked his daughter, you know, Didi, what happened? Can you tell me what happened that day? It was the complete opposite of what I had remembered. So I had remembered, or I remembered that the raid came from downhill, up the hill. But what actually happened was that the raid came downhill from up the hill. And the most surprising thing was, and the most tragic thing of it was, I thought that it happened in 1986, right? That was what my imagination was telling me, or whatever fragments that I remembered from that day. I had fixed it in 1986, but my sister told me that you're completely off the mark. It happened in 88. So memory plays tricks. Memory plays tricks where there are gaps. Memory and imagination fill in those gaps, and we forget the specifics of that day. Was it June? Was it July? Was it monsoon? Was it summer? Then the stories, they just become vague and nebulous, and they keep becoming vague and vague and vague, more and more vague. And what do you do? So that is, I think, the one big learning from this is that we have to narrativize this. Uh, Politicians will, of course, if you ask the same question to a politician, perhaps he will say, or he or she will say something different. But you know, if you ask a translator and a writer, I think that's what they'll say. That let's start talking about these things, because if we don't acknowledge what has happened, then number one, we might repeat it. The same mistakes, we might repeat those same mistakes. It's very easy to say that we are a peace-loving people, and you know, but it's difficult to confront our own past and see that yes, mistakes have been made, wrongs have been committed, uh, killings and murders have taken place, violence has happened, and perhaps if we understand that, then we probably will make the same mistakes again, but at least we know that somebody was there to bear witness.
Thank you, Anurag, for this wonderful conversation. And I earnestly hope that the book reaches more readers through our podcast.
Thank you so much. I'll just end with this. Darjeeling is a small corner of India. It's away. It's difficult, in a land, in a country as big as India. It's difficult to get your stories heard. Everyone has stories. Everyone has comparing stories. Everyone has valid stories, and we are all trying to get ourselves heard. Uh, and I'm very happy and I'm very thankful to you, because we need all the platforms we can find to tell our stories. So I think this is a brilliant initiative, and I hope you don't discontinue it at all, and you keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so nice of you to say that. Thank you very much.